Tonight in the Philippines, the country markets itself as 7,641 islands of tropical paradise. White sand beaches, crystal blue waters, the pearl of the Orient. But the Philippines is responsible for 36% of all plastic entering the world's oceans. More than India, more than China, more than Indonesia, more than all of them combined. Metro Manila sits at the center of 17 river systems that drain into Manila Bay. The Pasig River alone dumps 63,000 metric tons of plastic into the ocean every single year. That is not a typo, 63,000 metric tons from one river. And here is what makes it worse. 7 of the 10 most plastic polluted rivers on the entire planet flow through the Philippines. The country that sells you island getaways is poisoning the sea those islands sit in. The problem is not that the system is broken. The problem is that it works exactly as designed. When it rains in Manila, the water has to go somewhere, and it takes everything with it. Tonight, we are going to show you a city that generates 163 million plastic sachets every single day and has nowhere to put them. A drainage system that is 70% clogged with garbage, and a private company that removed 8.5 million tons of waste from the rivers and still could not keep up. 14 million people living in a place that was never designed to hold them, flushing their waste into waterways that empty into the bay they swim in. This is not a story about pollution. This is a story about what happens when paradise runs out of room for its own garbage. To understand how Manila ended up choking on its own waste, you have to understand the geography. Manila Bay is essentially a giant bathtub. It has 1,994 square kilometers of drainage area, 17 principal river systems, and 190 kilometers of coastline. All of it funnels toward one enclosed body of water with limited exchange to the open ocean. Every river, every creek, every storm drain in the metropolitan region eventually empties into this bay. And at the center of it all sits the Pasig River. The Pasig stretches 27 kilometers from Laguna de Bay in the east to Manila Bay in the west. Before the Spanish arrived, it was a trading artery. Indigenous communities used it for transport and commerce. The Spanish built their colonial capital along its banks. For centuries, the river was the lifeblood of Manila. People bathed in it, fished from it, and drank from it. Then came the 20th century. In the 1930s, observers noticed that fish migration from Laguna de Bay was declining. Something in the water was changing. By the 1960s, people stopped using river water to launder their clothes, and the smell became noticeable. In the 1970s, swine and poultry operations upstream in Rizal province began dumping their waste directly into tributaries, and the river began to stink. By the 1980s, the government prohibited fishing entirely. The fish were either gone or too contaminated to eat. By 1990, scientists made it official. The Pasig River was declared biologically dead. Nothing could survive in it except bacteria and the hardiest bottom feeders. But here is where it gets interesting. The river did not die because Filipinos are careless. The river died because of economics. The Philippines has over 20 million people living below the poverty line. When you are poor, you cannot afford to buy shampoo in a bottle. You cannot afford laundry detergent in a box. You buy what you can afford, and what you can afford is a single serving, one sachet at a time. The corporations figured this out decades ago. They built what economists now call the sachet economy. Instead of selling you a bottle of cooking oil, they sell you a tiny plastic pouch with enough for one meal. Instead of a tube of toothpaste, they sell you a foil packet with enough for one brushing. It is brilliant marketing. It is also an environmental catastrophe. Filipinos consume 164 million sachets every single day. Add to that 48 million shopping bags. Add 45 million thin film plastic bags. That is over 250 million pieces of single-use plastic entering the waste stream every 24 hours in a country where 70% of the population lacks access to proper disposal facilities. The plastic has nowhere to go. So it goes into the rivers. And then there are the people who live along those rivers. As of 2022, the Philippines had 3.7 million informal settler families nationwide. In the Manila Bay watershed alone, 233,000 families live in structures built directly over or alongside waterways. These are not houses in the traditional sense. They are shanties constructed on stilts above the water, or shacks wedged onto muddy riverbanks. They have no sewage connections. They have no septic tanks. In the Baseco compound near the Port of Manila, 5,000 families have no toilets at all. Where does their waste go? Directly into the water below them. A 2019 study by the Department of Interior and local government found that 80% of the pollution in Manila Bay could be attributed to informal settlements. Not factories, not corporations. Poor families with no other options, living in the only places they can afford, which happen to be the drainage channels of a mega city. The government knows this. In 2008, the Supreme Court issued a mandamus ordering 13 agencies to clean up Manila Bay and restore it to swimmable quality by 2020. One of the key requirements was relocating informal settlers away from waterways. But relocation requires money. It requires available land. It requires political will to move hundreds of thousands of voters. 15 years after that court order, the families are still there, the waste is still flowing, and the bay is still polluted. Here is the calculation that nobody wants to make. Every informal settler family that gets relocated creates a vacancy, and that vacancy gets filled almost immediately by another family with nowhere else to go. The problem is not the people. The problem is that Metro Manila has 14 million residents and a housing stock that was built for maybe half that number. The poor end up on the riverbanks because the riverbanks are the only land that nobody else wants, until it floods. And then everyone wants someone else to solve the problem. The city did not become this way overnight. It took decades of choices that prioritized economic growth over infrastructure. Decades of looking the other way while factories dumped effluent and households dumped garbage. Decades of building upward and outward without building the sewage systems to match. And now those choices are coming due. Every typhoon season, every flood, every health advisory that tells residents not to swim in the bay, their taxes are supposedly cleaning. The geography made Manila vulnerable. The poverty made it worse, and the politics made it permanent. Now let us talk about what actually flows through these waterways, because the numbers are staggering. The Philippines generates 2.7 million tons of plastic waste every single year. Of that, roughly 20% ends up in the ocean. That is 540,000 tons of plastic annually escaping into the sea from one country. To put that in perspective, the Philippines accounts for 36% of all ocean plastic pollution on Earth. India contributes about 13%, China about 7%, Indonesia about 6%. The Philippines alone dumps nearly 3 times more plastic into the ocean than China, a country with 10 times its population. How is that possible? Rivers. A 2021 study published in Science Advances by the Ocean Cleanup mapped every river on Earth that contributes plastic to the oceans. They found that 80% of ocean plastic comes from rivers, not beaches, not ships, not coastal dumping, rivers. And when they ranked the rivers by plastic output, the results were damning. The Pasig River in Manila came in first, not 5th, not 10th, first. The most polluting river on the planet. It dethroned China's Yangtze, which had held that position for years. The Pasig alone accounts for 6.43% of all river plastic entering the world's oceans. But it does not stop there. The study identified 19 Philippine rivers in the top 50 most polluting rivers globally. The Tulahan, the May Kawayan, the Pampanga, the Libmanan, the Rio Grande de Mindanao. In total, 466 rivers in the Philippines collectively dump 356,371 metric tons of plastic into the ocean every year. No other country comes close. The geography explains part of it. The Philippines is an archipelago with over 7,600 islands. Coastal populations are enormous. The distance from any point on land to a river, and from that river to the ocean, is short. Rainfall is heavy and frequent. Paved urban surfaces channel runoff directly into waterways. Plastic moves from street to drain to creek to river to bay to ocean in a matter of hours during a typhoon. But geography is only half the story. The other half is sewage. Only 15% of Metro Manila's population is connected to a sewerage system. That means 85% of households in the capital region have no pipe carrying their waste to a treatment plant. Nationwide, less than 10% of all wastewater gets treated before discharge. 90% goes directly into the environment. Rivers, groundwater, the bay. And it gets worse. Even households not connected to sewers typically have septic tanks. But 70% of those septic tanks are substandard. They leak, they overflow, they seep into the groundwater that other families drink from. The government estimates that 500,000 informal settlers around Laguna de Bay alone discharge raw sewage directly into the lake. That lake connects to the Pasig River. That river empties into Manila Bay. Here is the number that should keep you up at night. In January 2019, water quality tests at the Raja Solomon Outfall, one of the drainage points emptying into Manila Bay, measured fecal coliform levels at 35 million mpn per 100 milliliters. The safe standard for swimming is 100 mpn per 100 milliliters. That outfall was testing at 350,000 times the safe limit, not twice the limit. Not 10 times, 350,000 times. The Department of Environment and Natural Resources responded by issuing notices to about 100 businesses in the area. That was their response. Notices. Now consider what is actually being done to clean this up. The government operates a program called the Pasig River Coordinating and Management Office. They employ 163 environmental aides known as river warriors. These workers go out every day in small boats with nets and collect floating garbage from the Pasig and its 47 tributaries. They use 3 trash boats. They install trash barriers at strategic points. From January to May of 2024, they collected 1,603 tons of waste. That sounds like a lot until you do the math. The rivers of the Philippines discharge 356,371 tons of plastic into the ocean annually. The river warriors collected 1,603 tons in 5 months. If you annualize their output, they are removing roughly 3,800 tons per year. That is approximately 1% of what flows in. For every bag of garbage they pull from the water, 99 more float past them to the sea. The executive director of the program called the revitalization of the Pasig River a tall order. That might be the understatement of the decade. And the trash is only the visible part. Beneath the surface, the rivers carry something worse. Microplastics have been detected in the sediment throughout the Pasig River system. Heavy metals, including lead and iron, contaminate the riverbed. Pesticides from agricultural runoff accumulate in the mud. A 2024 study found that the combination of microplastics and heavy metals in Pasig River sediments poses serious risks to both ecosystem function and human health. The plastics absorb toxins from the water and concentrate them. Fish ingest the plastics. People eat the fish. The poison moves up the food chain. Meanwhile, every monsoon season brings a fresh reminder of how the system actually works. Typhoon Karina hit in July 2024. The rainfall exceeded 60 millimeters per hour. The drainage system was designed for 30 millimeters per hour. Water rose to the second floors of homes across Metro Manila. When crews inspected the pumping stations afterward, they found them clogged. Not with silt, with garbage. Sofas, refrigerators, thousands of plastic bags. The Metropolitan Manila Development Authority reported collecting almost 600 tons of trash from pumping stations and flooded areas in just 5 days. The president himself acknowledged the problem. He launched the Bayanihan sa Estero campaign and stood in front of cameras saying that even the best flood control projects will not work if the waterways remain clogged with trash. He ordered an audit. He promised accountability. Arrest warrants were eventually issued for a former congressman and 17 others connected to a flood control scandal. Billions of pesos had been allocated. Projects had been approved. Some of those projects did not exist. Here is where it gets interesting. A private company decided to do what the government could not, and the numbers they pulled from the water tell a story that officials would rather not discuss. In 2020, San Miguel Corporation launched Better Rivers PH. San Miguel is one of the largest conglomerates in the Philippines. They make beer, they produce food, they build highways, and they decided to spend their own money cleaning rivers. Not as charity, not as a publicity stunt, as a serious infrastructure intervention. They started with the Tulahan River, a 27-kilometer-long waterway that runs through Navotas, Malabon, Valenzuela, and Caloocan, some of the most flood-prone cities in Metro Manila. The Tulahan had become so clogged with silt and garbage that sections were less than 1 meter deep. When it rained, the water had nowhere to go. It spilled into streets and homes and stayed there for days. San Miguel deployed heavy dredging equipment, not the small boats with nets that the government uses. Industrial machinery capable of extracting thousands of tons per day. Over 26 months, they pulled 1.12 million metric tons of silt and solid waste from the Tulahan. When they finished, sections that had been 1 meter deep were now 4 meters deep. The river could actually carry water again. Then they moved to the Pasig. The company committed 2 billion pesos to the Pasig River cleanup. That is roughly $35 million US. Their target was to extract 50,000 metric tons of waste per month, or 600,000 metric tons per year. They partnered with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the Department of Public Works and Highways, and local government units in Manila, Mandaluyong, Makati, and Pasig. But the funding came entirely from San Miguel. No taxpayer money, no government budget allocation. A private corporation writing checks because the public sector could not or would not. The results were remarkable. In just 20 months, they extracted 1.5 million metric tons of waste from the Pasig River. They beat their Tulahan timeline by 6 months, despite the Pasig being a larger and more complex waterway. Sections that had been half a meter deep were now 5 to 6 meters deep. The river's flood carrying capacity increased dramatically. They did not stop there. They cleaned the San Juan River, a major tributary of the Pasig, removing over 170,000 tons. They moved into Bulacan province and started dredging the Marilao-May-Kawayan-Obando River system, extracting over 2 million tons in just over a year. They expanded to Laguna, clearing the Tunasan River, the San Isidro River, and the Binan River. As of late 2024, San Miguel's river cleanup program had removed 8.5 million metric tons of waste from 161 kilometers of river channels across 10 major waterways. 8. That is an almost incomprehensible number. If you loaded that waste onto dump trucks, the line would stretch for thousands of kilometers. And it worked. Residents along the Tulahan reported that severe flooding had decreased noticeably. Communities near the Pasig said floodwaters no longer reached their second floors. One resident told reporters that before the cleanup, they would start moving furniture upstairs the moment rain began. Now the water rises and falls without the same terror. San Miguel's president said the company could not afford to stand by and do nothing. The economy suffers when the city floods. Businesses close. Supply chains break. Workers cannot reach their jobs. Cleaning the rivers was not altruism. It was self-interest dressed in public benefit. But here is the number that matters. San Miguel removed 8.5 million tons in 5 years. That sounds like victory. It is not. The rivers of the Philippines discharge 356,371 tons of plastic into the ocean every year. Over 5 years, that is approximately 1.78 million tons entering the ocean from rivers alone. San Miguel removed nearly 5 times that amount. They should have solved the problem. They did not. Because the waste they removed was not the waste entering the ocean. It was the waste that had accumulated over decades. The silt from years of erosion, the garbage from generations of dumping, the sediment that had built up since the Pasig was declared dead in 1990. The source never stopped. Every day, 163 million sachets enter the waste stream. Every day, households without sewage connections flush waste into drains. Every day, informal settlers with no alternatives dispose of garbage into the water below their homes. San Miguel cleaned the river. The river filled back up. If you are still here, you now understand why the Philippines accounts for 36% of all plastic entering the world's oceans. Comment the number 2 below if you are following this investigation, and if you have not subscribed, please kindly do so, and turn on the bell notification so you do not miss what comes next. Your support helps us keep exposing the infrastructure failures that governments would rather not discuss. Now let us talk about the $20 billion in flood control spending, and why the same neighborhoods still flood every single year. The company acknowledged this. Their president said the cleanup was just the first step, the necessary step. But without changing behavior, without stopping the dumping, without building sewage infrastructure, the rivers would need to be cleaned again, and again, and again. And then there is the drainage system itself. The Department of Public Works and Highways admitted after Typhoon Karina that 70% of Metro Manila's internal drainage is clogged with garbage and silt. Not 20%, not 40%, 70%. The drainage network is over 50 years old. It was designed for a city that no longer exists. The pipes are too small, and the capacity is too low. The system can handle 30 millimeters of rain per hour. Modern typhoons routinely dump twice that. The Metropolitan Manila Development Authority operates 71 pumping stations across the region. These stations are supposed to push floodwater out of low-lying areas and into rivers that carry it to the bay. During Karina, all 71 stations were overwhelmed, not because the pumps failed, but because the intake channels were clogged with garbage. Workers pulled sofas from the drainage mains, refrigerators, mattresses, the detritus of a city that has no room for its own waste. The chairman of the Metropolitan Manila Development Authority told reporters that the government cannot solve this alone. Everyone needs to participate. Proper waste disposal is a shared responsibility. That sounds reasonable until you remember that 70% of Filipinos lack access to proper disposal facilities. You cannot practice proper waste disposal when there is no system to dispose of waste properly. Since 2015, the Philippine government has allocated 1.14 trillion pesos for flood control projects. That is approximately $20 billion. Nearly half of that allocation came under the current Marcos administration. And yet the same neighborhoods flood every year. The same residents evacuate to the same shelters. The same crews pull the same garbage from the same pumping stations. Where did the money go? The president ordered an audit. Investigators found projects that existed only on paper, contractors who were paid for work that was never done, and politicians who inserted flood control allocations as last-minute additions to the budget. In late 2024, arrest warrants were issued for a former congressman and 17 others connected to what prosecutors called a flood control scandal. Billions of pesos had disappeared into a system designed to protect citizens from drowning. The Metropolitan Manila Development Authority announced plans for a comprehensive drainage master plan modeled on the Netherlands, a 50 to 60-year project that would anticipate rainfall patterns decades into the future and build infrastructure accordingly. The World Bank would fund it. It sounds ambitious. It also sounds like an admission that the current system is beyond repair. The private sector removed 8.5 million tons. The government spent $20 billion, and every typhoon season, the same neighborhoods flood to the same floors. Because the problem was never just about cleaning the rivers. In 2008, the Supreme Court of the Philippines issued what should have been a turning point. A group of citizens had filed a case demanding that the government clean up Manila Bay. The court agreed. It issued a mandamus, a legal order compelling action, directing 13 government agencies to rehabilitate the bay and restore its waters to Class SB quality. That means swimmable, safe for human contact, the kind of water you would let your children play in. The deadline was 2020. The court order covered everything: sewage treatment, solid waste management, relocation of informal settlers, enforcement of pollution laws, rehabilitation of rivers and tributaries. It was comprehensive. It was legally binding. It named specific agencies and gave them specific responsibilities. 15 years later, only 6 of the 65 water districts covered by the mandamus have established sewage treatment plants. The bay is not swimmable. The deadline passed. Nothing happened. Here is why. The math does not work. The Manila Bay watershed spans 178 local government units across 3 regions. Each of those units has its own mayor, its own council, its own budget priorities, its own political calculations. Coordinating action across that many jurisdictions is nearly impossible. The national government can issue orders, but it cannot force compliance. Take sewage. The Clean Water Act of 2004 required the agency responsible for water supply in Metro Manila to connect all establishments to available sewerage systems within 5 years. That deadline was 2009. 20 years later, only 15% of Metro Manila is connected. Outside the capital, the situation is worse. Of the 17 highly urbanized cities in the Philippines beyond Metro Manila, only 1 has a sewerage system, and that system covers just 11% of the urban area. Nationwide, only 163 of the country's 1,634 cities and municipalities have established septic management systems. The rest have nothing. No treatment, no collection, no infrastructure. Waste goes into the ground or into the water. The economic cost of this failure is staggering. A 2015 study estimated that water pollution cost the Philippines 78 billion pesos annually. That is $1.4 billion every year in health impacts, lost productivity, environmental damage, and cleanup costs. The country is paying the price of inaction whether it builds the infrastructure or not. Then there is the relocation problem. The government knows that informal settlers along waterways are a primary source of pollution. The solution seems obvious: move them. But relocation requires land, and land in Metro Manila is expensive. It requires housing, and housing budgets are limited. It requires political will, and politicians are reluctant to displace voters. The National Housing Authority is responsible for finding relocation sites. Data between agencies is not harmonized. Nobody knows exactly how many families need to move or where they would go. And here is the deeper problem. Every family relocated creates a vacancy. Within months, sometimes weeks, another family moves in. The waterway settlements exist because housing in Manila is unaffordable for the poor. Until that changes, people will keep coming. The government can relocate 233,000 families from the Manila Bay watershed, but if it does not solve the housing crisis that put them there, 233,000 more will take their place. The 2022 Extended Producer Responsibility Act was supposed to address the plastic side of the equation. The law requires companies that produce plastic packaging to take responsibility for its entire life cycle. Collect it, recycle it, keep it out of the environment. The target is 80% recovery of plastic packaging by 2028. It is a start, but implementation is slow, enforcement is uncertain, and 163 million sachets still enter the waste stream every day. There is another factor that nobody talks about. The ground itself is sinking. A study by researchers at the University of the Philippines found that parts of Metro Manila are subsiding at rates of 20 to 42 millimeters per year. The cause is groundwater extraction. Millions of households and businesses pump water from underground aquifers because the municipal supply is inadequate. Every liter pumped out causes the land above to compact and sink. The areas most affected are also the most flood-prone: Caloocan, Malabon, Navotas, Valenzuela, parts of Manila itself. When land sinks and sea levels rise and drainage systems clog and rivers overflow, the water has nowhere to go. It stays, it accumulates, it fills the streets and the ground floors and sometimes the second floors. And when it finally recedes, it leaves behind everything it carried: the garbage, the sewage, the sediment, ready to clog the system again. The title of this video promised something big is coming. Here is what that means. Climate scientists project that typhoons in the Western Pacific will intensify as ocean temperatures rise. The storms that hit the Philippines will carry more water and move more slowly, dumping more rain over longer periods. The drainage system that failed during Typhoon Karina was designed for weather patterns that no longer exist. The storms of 2030 will be worse than the storms of 2024. The storms of 2040 will be worse still. Meanwhile, the population keeps growing. The plastic consumption keeps rising. The sachets keep flowing into the waste stream at 163 million per day with no sign of slowing. The informal settlements keep expanding because housing remains unaffordable and the waterways remain the only free land. The sewage infrastructure that should have been built decades ago still does not exist for 85% of the capital. Taiwan sits in the same region, same typhoons, same ocean, different outcome. Taiwan accounts for 0.05% of global ocean plastic pollution. The Philippines accounts for 36%. Taiwan passed its Marine Pollution Control Act in 2000. It implemented an action plan for marine debris in 2018. It banned free plastic straws in 2020 and pledged to eliminate all single-use plastics by 2030. Same geography, same storms, different choices. The Philippines built its economy on single-serve packaging because poverty demanded it. It built its cities on floodplains because that is where the opportunity was. It housed its poorest citizens on riverbanks because the land was free. Every choice made sense at the time. Every choice created the system that now chokes the waterways and poisons the bay. The cleanup crews can remove 8.5 million tons. The government can allocate $20 billion. The engineers can design pumping stations and drainage master plans. But until the sachets stop and the sewage gets treated and the settlers have somewhere else to go, the rivers will keep filling back up. Manila Bay was supposed to be swimmable by 2020. The deadline passed. The bay is still polluted, and every rainy season the same neighborhoods flood to the same floors and the same crews pull the same garbage from the same rivers. Something big is coming. It is not a solution. It is the next typhoon.